The Waitress and the Millionaire. It was a night like any other at the Silver Crest, the most luxurious restaurant in the city, known for its grandiose chandeliers, marble floors, and velvet-clad seating. The air inside was thick with the aroma of gourmet dishes and the soft murmur of affluent guests who dined here not just for the food, but for the experience of being seen in such an exclusive establishment. Among them tonight was Olivia Torres, a 24-year-old waitress who blended into the background like she always did. Olivia wasn't meant to be a waitress, at least not forever. Her hands were meant for something far more delicate than carrying trays of champagne and lobster bisque. She was a violinist, or had been. The violin was her life, her passion, and for most of her childhood, it was the key to a dream career as a professional musician. Raised in a family of humble means, Olivia had earned scholarships to prestigious music schools, practicing for hours upon hours to perfect her craft. But life had a way of dismantling plans. When her younger brother was diagnosed with a rare illness, Olivia's world shifted. Medical bills piled up, and her family could no longer afford to pay for her studies. Without hesitation, she had set aside her violin to support her family. She took up jobs, any jobs, that could help cover the cost of treatments. The Silver Crest, with its wealthy clientele and the potential for good tips, became her best option. Now, years had passed since she last touched her beloved violin. Olivia, though grateful for the work, felt like a shadow of her former self. She wasn't living, she was merely surviving. In the corner of the restaurant, sitting at his private table, was Simon Harrington, a man whose very name sent shivers through the business world. A ruthless 47-year-old entrepreneur, Simon had amassed a fortune in real estate and technology. His rise to power had come at the cost of others, and he was known for his cold-hearted tactics. In his world, people were either assets or obstacles, and he crushed anyone who stood in his way. Simon was a man who commanded attention. His sharp features, meticulously groomed beard, and custom-tailored suits set him apart even among the wealthy elite. To Simon, the world was his playground, and tonight, he was looking for amusement. As Olivia weaved her way between the tables, she was acutely aware of Simon's presence. He was a regular at the Silver Crest, though their interactions had been limited to brief exchanges when she took his order. He always demanded perfection and had no patience for mistakes. Tonight, however, something about his demeanor felt different, more watchful, more calculating. Simon scanned the room with disinterest until his gaze fell on Olivia. Something about the way she moved caught his attention, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he felt the urge to disrupt her composure. Bored with his dinner companions and in need of entertainment, Simon waved Olivia over to his table with a casual flick of his wrist. She approached, careful not to make eye contact, and asked for his order. Simon's eyes narrowed as a cruel smile crept across his face. "Do you play any instruments, Olivia?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. Caught off guard by the question, Olivia hesitated. I used to play the violin," she replied softly, unsure where the conversation was headed. "Used to?" Simon leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the table. Why stop? Olivia felt a pang of sadness as she remembered her violin, now collecting dust in a corner of her apartment. "Family circumstances," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Simon's smile widened. "Ah, a shame. A talent like that shouldn't be wasted." Before Olivia could respond, Simon continued, his voice taking on a more commanding tone. "I happen to have a violin here tonight," he said, nodding toward a sleek black case resting beside his chair. "Why don't you play something for us?" Olivia's heart sank. She hadn't played in years, and the thought of doing so in front of Simon, whose every move seemed calculated to manipulate those around him, filled her with dread. But she couldn't refuse. He was one of the restaurant's most influential patrons, and his whims often dictated the staff's fate. I'm not sure I can," she stammered, trying to find a way out. "Nonsense," Simon said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I insist. With a sinking feeling, Olivia nodded, unable to escape the trap Simon had laid for her. As one of the other waitstaff retrieved the violin for her, she stood frozen, her mind racing. She hadn't played in years. What if she made a fool of herself? But she couldn't back out now. The violin was placed gently in her hands, its familiar weight stirring old memories. Olivia closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She had to do this. There was no other choice. Slowly, she raised the bow to the strings. The first note trembled out of the violin, shaky and uncertain. Olivia could feel the weight of Simon's gaze on her, along with the curious stares of the other patrons. But as she continued to play, something inside her shifted. The rust of years began to fall away, and the music that had once been her passion started to flow through her again. The restaurant, usually filled with the quiet hum of conversation, fell silent as Olivia's music filled the space. The melody was soft at first, hesitant, but it grew bolder with each passing moment. It was a piece she had played countless times in her youth, a piece filled with sorrow and hope, with yearning and loss. As the notes rose and fell, something changed in Simon as well. The cruel smirk that had been playing on his lips faded, replaced by something else, something unfamiliar to him. For the first time in years, Simon Harrington felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. The music swelled, filling the restaurant with a haunting beauty that seemed to resonate with everyone present. Olivia's fingers moved with the grace of a dancer, coaxing emotions from the strings that she had long thought forgotten. When the last note finally hung in the air, there was a pause, a stillness that filled the room. For a moment, no one moved. And then, slowly, the patrons began to applaud, their faces reflecting the emotions Olivia's music had stirred in them. But it was Simon's reaction that was the most surprising. He sat motionless, his eyes locked on Olivia as if seeing her for the first time. His usual mask of indifference had cracked, revealing a vulnerability he had long buried. What had begun as a whim, a cruel game to amuse himself, had left Simon shaken in a way he hadn't anticipated. Olivia, still holding the violin, felt the weight of his gaze, but for the first time, she didn't feel small. She had remembered who she was, what she was capable of. And though Simon had forced her to play, the music had become hers once again. As she lowered the violin, Olivia knew that something had shifted, not just in Simon, but in herself as well. Unveiling the past. The applause in the restaurant began to fade, but the tension between Olivia and Simon lingered like a tangible thread, stretched thin across the polished tables and velvet curtains. Olivia stood frozen, still clutching the violin, her pulse pounding in her ears. The realization of what had just happened slowly settled in. She had played the violin after years of silence, brought back by the very man whose presence always made her feel insignificant. Simon sat motionless, his gaze never leaving her. The smugness and control that usually colored his expression had melted away, replaced by something unidentifiable, something almost vulnerable. For a moment, Olivia wondered if she had misjudged him. Could there be more to Simon Harrington than the cold-hearted businessman everyone saw? But she quickly banished the thought. Simon had forced her to play, to relive a part of her life she had buried. He had reduced her to an object of entertainment, a pawn in his game of power. There was no room for sympathy. Enough, Olivia muttered under her breath. She handed the violin back to the staff member, her hands trembling. The applause was still echoing faintly in the background, but Olivia wanted nothing more than to disappear. The weight of the moment, the reawakening of old dreams and long-buried pain, was almost too much to bear. She turned, intending to slip away, to retreat to the kitchen and find some space to breathe, but Simon's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. "Wait." Olivia paused, her hand inches away from the door that led to the back of the restaurant. Slowly, she turned to face him. Simon was no longer lounging casually in his seat. He stood now, his eyes burning with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Olivia's instinct was to refuse. She had no desire to stay a moment longer than necessary in his presence. But something in his tone, something more serious and insistent than his earlier demands, made her hesitate. Against her better judgment, she walked toward his table and sat down. Simon's eyes flickered with something unreadable as he leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. For a long moment, he said nothing, studying her as though he were trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly become much more complicated. "You used to play," he finally said, his voice quieter than before. "But you stopped." Olivia clenched her fists under the table. This wasn't a conversation she wanted to have, especially not with someone like Simon Harrington, who had no right to pry into her personal life. "I told you," she replied, her voice flat. "Family circumstances." "Family circumstances," Simon repeated, his brow furrowing slightly. He seemed dissatisfied with the answer. "What kind of family circumstances would make you stop playing like that?" "You have real talent." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they reminded Olivia of everything she had lost. She had once believed in her talent, once thought that her music could take her somewhere. But life had gotten in the way, and she had let that dream slip through her fingers. "It doesn't matter," she said, her tone sharper than she intended. "It was a long time ago." Simon didn't respond immediately. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he observed her. His usual air of superiority had returned, but now it was tempered with something else. Curiosity, perhaps. "What if you could play again?" he asked suddenly. Olivia blinked, taken aback by the question. She hadn't expected this conversation to go in this direction. She had anticipated more mockery, more cruelty. "Not this." "I can't," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It's too late. I don't have the time, and I don't have the means." Simon's expression remained unreadable as he considered her words. Then, without warning, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek leather checkbook. Olivia watched in stunned silence as he wrote something on one of the checks, tore it out, and slid it across the table toward her. Her heart pounded as she glanced down at the check. The number on it was staggering, more money than she had ever seen in her life. What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Simon's gaze was piercing as he spoke. "It's an opportunity. You don't have to work here anymore. You don't have to waste your talents serving food to people who don't care about you." Olivia's hands shook as she stared at the check, her mind racing. It was the kind of offer most people only dreamed of, an escape from the life she had been trapped in for years. But there was something about it that didn't sit right with her. Simon didn't give things away for free. There had to be a catch. She met his gaze, her eyes narrowing. "What do you want in return?" Simon's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't the cruel, mocking smile she had come to expect from him. It was more subtle, more calculated. "I want you to play," he said simply. "For me." Olivia's stomach churned. She had known there would be a catch. Of course, Simon didn't just want to help her out of the goodness of his heart. He wanted something from her, something that, in his mind, would justify the extravagant sum of money he was offering. "I'm not some performer you can just buy," she said, her voice laced with anger. "I'm not asking you to be," Simon replied smoothly. "But let's not pretend that you don't miss it. I saw the way you played tonight. That wasn't just a waitress playing a song because she was told to. That was someone who loves music, who needs it." Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. Simon's words hit too close to home. She had spent years burying her passion for music, convincing herself that it didn't matter anymore, that her family's needs were more important than her own dreams. But tonight, playing the violin again, she had felt something stir inside her, something she had long thought was dead. Simon leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Take the money. Play again. You don't owe me anything beyond that." Olivia's mind raced as she considered his offer. It was tempting. So tempting. The money would change everything. She could quit her job at the Silver Crest, devote herself to music again, maybe even help her family in ways she never thought possible. But then a darker thought crept into her mind. Simon Harrington was not a man to be trusted. He had a reputation for manipulating people, for using them to his advantage. If she took his money, if she agreed to play for him, what would that really mean? "What's in it for you?" she asked, her voice low. Simon's expression remained unreadable as he replied, "Consider it a selfish interest. I enjoy hearing good music, and I enjoy knowing that I've played a part in bringing it back into the world." The answer was vague, but it wasn't the overt manipulation Olivia had expected. Still, something about this felt off. She wasn't sure if she could trust him. "I need time to think," she said finally, pushing the check back toward him. Simon raised an eyebrow, but didn't press her. "Take all the time you need," he said, slipping the check back into his jacket pocket. "But remember this, Olivia. Opportunities like this don't come around often. Don't waste it." With that, he stood and left the restaurant, leaving Olivia sitting alone at the table, her thoughts a tangled mess. She didn't know what to do. The violin had been her dream once, but she wasn't sure if she could trust Simon, or herself, to bring it back into her life. As she sat there, the memory of her music still fresh in her mind, she realized one thing. No matter what, something had shifted tonight, and there was no going back. The weight of a choice. Olivia spent the next few days trying to resume her normal routine at the Silver Crest, but everything had changed. The rhythm of her life, which had once been predictable and monotonous, now felt heavy with uncertainty. Every time she picked up a tray or refilled a glass, her mind would drift back to that night, to the violin in her hands, to the haunting notes she had coaxed from it, and to Simon Harrington's unsettling offer. The check he had written her haunted her thoughts. It was more than just money. It was a doorway, an invitation back into a life she thought she had left behind. But accepting that invitation would mean walking into Simon's world, a world where nothing was ever truly given for free. Olivia wasn't naive. She knew the type of man Simon Harrington was. He wielded power like a weapon, and he was used to getting what he wanted. And yet she couldn't deny the pull. The longing to play again had been reignited inside her, and it grew stronger every day. Every spare moment, Olivia found herself imagining the bow in her hand, the familiar pressure of the strings beneath her fingers. She remembered the joy and freedom she used to feel when she played, as if the violin was an extension of herself, expressing the emotions she could never quite put into words. But then came the other thoughts, the memories she had fought so hard to suppress. The image of her younger brother, Leo, lying in a hospital bed, pale and weak, hooked up to machines that hummed with a monotonous rhythm. The bills had piled up so quickly after his diagnosis, and her family had been plunged into a financial crisis that seemed to have no end. Every day had been a fight to keep their heads above water, to scrape together enough money to afford the treatments that kept Leo alive. Music had been a luxury they couldn't afford. Olivia had walked away from it to save her brother, and though she had never once regretted that decision, the pain of giving up her dream had settled into her bones, a constant ache that she had learned to live with. Now Simon's offer dangled in front of her like a lifeline. But what if it was just another trap? What if taking the money meant giving up something else, something she couldn't see yet? Simon had said there were no strings attached, but Olivia didn't believe him. He wasn't the type of man to do something for nothing. 2 days after their encounter, Olivia found herself standing outside the Silver Crest, her shift finished for the night. The bustling city streets around her blurred as her thoughts consumed her. She needed to make a decision, but her mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. "Hey, Olivia." She looked up, startled, to see Sarah, one of the other waitresses, waving at her from across the street. Sarah was a few years older than Olivia, with bright, curious eyes and a cheerful smile that could lift anyone's spirits. She was also one of the few people at the restaurant who had become a friend to Olivia, someone she could talk to when the weight of life became too much to bear. Olivia forced a smile and waved back as Sarah crossed the street to join her. "You okay?" Sarah asked, eyeing her with concern. You've been a little out of it the past few days." Olivia hesitated, unsure of how to explain what was going on. She hadn't told anyone about Simon's offer, partly because she didn't know how to talk about it, and partly because she wasn't sure she could trust her own feelings about it. "Just thinking about stuff," Olivia said, her voice vague. Sarah gave her a knowing look. "You mean about playing again?" Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "What? How did you?" "I heard," Sarah interrupted, her tone light but understanding. "Word spreads fast in this place. People were talking about how you played the violin for Simon Harrington the other night." Olivia sighed, feeling exposed. Of course, people were talking. The restaurant was a hotbed of gossip, and nothing ever stayed a secret for long. "It wasn't a big deal," Olivia muttered. "He just asked me to play." Sarah's brow furrowed as she studied Olivia. "It's more than that, though, isn't it? I can see it on your face. It's like you've been somewhere else since then." Olivia looked down at the pavement, unable to meet Sarah's gaze. "He offered me money, a lot of money, to quit my job and play again." Sarah's eyes widened. "What? Seriously? How much money are we talking?" "Enough," Olivia said quietly. "More than I've ever seen." "Wow." Sarah's voice was filled with awe. That's incredible, Olivia. You could get out of here. You could finally follow your dream." "I don't understand. What's holding you back?" Olivia hesitated. How could she explain the complexity of her situation? It wasn't just about the money, or even about playing again. It was about everything that had led her to this point. Her family's struggles, her own sacrifices, and the fear that accepting Simon's offer would come with a cost she couldn't see yet. "It's not that simple," Olivia said finally, her voice low. "Simon Harrington isn't the kind of man who gives without expecting something in return. I don't know what he wants from me, but I can't shake the feeling that taking his money would mean giving up more than I bargained for." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "I get that," she said slowly. "But I also think you have to ask yourself what you want. I mean, you've been here, working at this restaurant, putting everyone else before yourself for so long. Maybe it's time to think about what you need." Olivia swallowed hard. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about what she wanted. She thought about it all the time. But every time she let herself imagine a future where she could play the violin again, where she could make music her life, the reality of her family's situation would crash down on her like a wave, reminding her of the responsibilities she couldn't ignore. "I don't know," Olivia whispered. "I don't even know if I can play like I used to. What if I've lost it? What if I'm not good enough anymore?" Sarah reached out and squeezed Olivia's arm. "Hey, don't talk like that. I wasn't there the other night, but I heard you were amazing. If Simon Harrington is willing to throw that kind of money at you, it's because he knows you've got something special. And you do." Olivia blinked back the tears that were threatening to spill over. She wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that she could still be the musician she had once dreamed of becoming. But the fear of failure loomed large in her mind. "Thanks," Olivia said softly. "I just need to figure this out." Sarah nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Take your time. But don't wait too long. You deserve to be happy, Olivia." With that, Sarah gave her a final encouraging smile and walked away, leaving Olivia standing alone on the sidewalk. As she stood there, watching the bustling city around her, Olivia felt the weight of her choice pressing down on her. If she accepted Simon's offer, she could finally escape the life she had been trapped in for years. She could play again, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to rekindle the dream she had buried so long ago. But what would she be giving up in return? And was she willing to pay that price? That night, as she lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling of her small apartment, Olivia's mind raced with possibilities. She thought about her family, about the sacrifices she had made, and about the violin, the one thing that had always made her feel alive. She thought about Simon, his cold eyes, and his inscrutable motives. Could she really trust him? As sleep finally began to pull her under, Olivia knew one thing for certain. Whatever decision she made, it would change everything. The price of ambition. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty for Olivia. She went through the motions at the Silver Crest, taking orders, clearing tables, and smiling politely at the patrons, but her mind was far from the polished silverware and overpriced entrees. Every spare moment, her thoughts returned to Simon Harrington's offer, to the check that could change her life. But what if it changed her in ways she wasn't prepared for? It was a Friday evening, and the Silver Crest was buzzing with activity. The wealthy elite of the city had gathered, as they always did, laughing, dining, and indulging in their extravagant lifestyles. The restaurant hummed with the sounds of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. But Olivia was barely aware of the opulence around her as she cleared a table near the back of the room. She felt a presence before she saw him. "Olivia." A familiar voice drawled from behind her. She stiffened. "Simon." Turning slowly, Olivia found herself face to face with Simon Harrington. He stood casually in his tailored suit, his eyes gleaming with the same intensity she had seen the night he asked her to play the violin. There was something different this time, though. He wasn't just watching her. He was waiting for something. "I've been expecting you to call," Simon said, his tone as smooth as ever. Olivia swallowed hard, her heart racing. She had thought about calling him a dozen times, but every time she picked up the phone, something inside her told her to wait, to be cautious. "I needed time," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Simon's smile was cold, though not unkind. "Of course, but time, as I'm sure you're aware, is a luxury not everyone can afford." Olivia flinched at the subtle warning in his words. He hadn't explicitly said it, but the message was clear. He wouldn't wait forever. If she didn't accept his offer soon, the opportunity would disappear, and she would be left with the life she had now. Simon gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Sit. Let's talk." Olivia hesitated, glancing around the restaurant. She didn't want to be seen sitting with him. The gossip would spread like wildfire, and the last thing she needed was for people to assume things about her. But Simon's gaze was unrelenting, and she knew that refusing him now might mean losing her chance altogether. Reluctantly, she sat down. For a long moment, Simon didn't speak. He studied her in silence, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. Olivia felt like a specimen under a microscope, as though he was calculating his next move, figuring out how best to manipulate her. "You haven't made up your mind yet," Simon said finally, leaning forward slightly. "Why?" Olivia felt her throat tighten. She had thought about this conversation countless times, rehearsing what she might say. But now, with Simon sitting so close, his presence overwhelming, her words seemed to tangle together. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Simon's eyes flickered with amusement. "Trust me. You think I'm trying to deceive you, aren't you?" Olivia shot back, her voice sharper than she intended. "You don't do anything without expecting something in return. I've heard the stories about you, Simon. People talk." His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "People talk, yes, and often they don't know what they're talking about. But let me ask you this, Olivia. What is it that you think I want from you?" Olivia faltered. She had asked herself that question 100 times. What did Simon Harrington really want? Why had he, a man with more money and power than anyone could ever need, taken an interest in her? "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "But it feels like you're trying to control me." Simon raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by her response. "Control you? Interesting. You think I offered you the check to control you?" Olivia shifted in her seat, feeling uncomfortable under his gaze. "Why else would you offer me so much money? You don't even know me." Simon leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're right. I don't know you, but I do know potential when I see it. You have a gift, Olivia, a gift that most people would kill for, and you're wasting it in a place like this." His words hit hard, slicing through her defenses. Deep down, she knew he was right. She was wasting her talent, wasting her life in this restaurant. But accepting his offer felt like a step into the unknown, into a world she didn't understand. "Look," Simon continued, his voice softening slightly. "I'm not asking you to sell your soul. I'm offering you a chance to take control of your life again. I know what it's like to feel trapped, to have the weight of the world on your shoulders. You don't have to live like that anymore." Olivia stared at him, her mind racing. There was something different in his tone now, something almost genuine. Could he really understand what she was going through? "You don't know what my life is like," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Simon's expression darkened. For the first time, there was a flicker of something like pain in his eyes. "You'd be surprised." Olivia blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift in his demeanor. For a moment, it felt like there was more to Simon than the cold, calculating businessman everyone knew him to be. But just as quickly, the moment passed, and his mask of indifference returned. "You can choose to stay here, working double shifts and scraping by, or you can take the opportunity I'm offering you," Simon said, his voice cool and measured again. "But don't mistake this for charity. I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. I see something in you, something valuable. And I believe it would be a waste for you to throw that away." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. Simon's words had struck a chord, and she could feel her resolve weakening. The truth was, she was exhausted. Exhausted from working endless hours, from carrying the burden of her family's financial struggles, from denying herself the one thing that had ever made her truly happy. But still, the question lingered. What did Simon want in return? "What happens after I take your money?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling slightly. "What do you expect from me?" Simon's lips curved into a faint smile. "I expect you to play. That's all. I want you to embrace your talent, to perform, to be the musician you were meant to be. And if that brings you success, then we both benefit." Olivia frowned. "Both benefit?" Simon's smile widened, and Olivia could see the calculated gleam in his eyes. "Think of it as an investment. I help you, and in return, your success reflects well on me. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." There it was. The catch. Simon didn't just want her to play. He wanted to be associated with her success, to claim a part of whatever she achieved. It wasn't a deal without strings. There were always strings with people like Simon. But what if those strings were the only way out of the life she was living now? Simon seemed to sense her hesitation and leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense. "Don't overthink it, Olivia. You've been given a gift. Don't waste it because you're afraid of what might happen. You're better than this place. And you know it." Olivia's mind whirled. Could she trust him? Was this her only chance to escape the life she had been trapped in for so long? The fear of making the wrong choice gnawed at her, but the fear of staying where she was, of letting her talent fade into nothing, was even stronger. "I'll do it," she said before she could stop herself, the words spilling out in a rush. "I'll take the money." Simon's smile was triumphant, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something darker, more dangerous. "Good. I knew you'd make the right choice." He stood and reached into his jacket, pulling out the check he had written for her days ago. He placed it on the table in front of her, his fingers lingering for just a moment too long before releasing it. "I'll be in touch," Simon said, his voice smooth and confident once more. "We have a lot to discuss." Olivia watched him walk away, her heart pounding in her chest. She had made her choice, but as she stared at the check in front of her, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something far more complicated than she had anticipated. The price of ambition, it seemed, was far higher than she had realized. The strings attached. Olivia stared at the check in her hand as though it were made of fire. It was real, tangible, the number printed on it so staggering that her mind struggled to grasp its significance. With this check, her life could change in an instant. She could finally quit the Silver Crest, help her family, and pursue the music that had once been her whole world. But the weight of the decision hung heavy on her chest. Simon Harrington's parting words echoed in her mind. "We have a lot to discuss." His voice had been calm, almost casual, but Olivia knew better. Nothing with Simon Harrington was ever that simple. The next few days were a blur of emotions. Olivia went through the motions of her job, but her heart wasn't in it. Every time she saw Sarah or her other coworkers, she felt a pang of guilt. None of them knew about the opportunity she was holding in her hands. None of them knew that soon she might be walking out of this place for good, leaving behind the grueling double shifts, the aching feet, and the ever-present worry about money. But would she be leaving behind her integrity as well? That thought haunted her. Simon had made it sound so simple. Take the money, play the violin, and everything would fall into place. But Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that accepting his help would come with unseen consequences, consequences that would bind her to Simon in ways she didn't yet understand. On the third day after her conversation with Simon, Olivia made her decision. She couldn't let fear hold her back anymore. She had sacrificed so much for her family, had put her dreams on hold for too long. This was her chance to reclaim her life. She had to take it, even if it meant dealing with someone as dangerous as Simon Harrington. That night she called him. The phone rang twice before Simon's smooth, confident voice answered. "Olivia." His tone was warm, as though he had been expecting her call. Of course he had. Simon Harrington always seemed to know what people would do before they did it. "I've made up my mind," Olivia said, gripping the phone tightly. "I'll take the money." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a low chuckle. "I knew you would. You're too smart to let an opportunity like this pass you by." Olivia bristled at his words, but she didn't respond. She wasn't doing this because of Simon's smug confidence. She was doing it for herself, for her family, for her future. "What happens now?" she asked, cutting through the pleasantries. "Now," Simon replied, "we meet tomorrow evening at my office. I'll have everything prepared. I'll send a car for you." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. Meeting Simon at his office, it felt like stepping deeper into his web, a web that she feared might be impossible to escape once she was inside. But she had made her choice. There was no turning back now. "Fine," she said, her voice steady. "I'll be there." The next evening, as promised, a sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment. The driver, a tall man in a black suit and sunglasses, said nothing as Olivia climbed into the back seat. The ride was smooth and silent, the city lights flashing by outside the tinted windows. Olivia's heart raced as they weaved through the streets, drawing closer to whatever awaited her. Simon's office was located in one of the tallest skyscrapers in the city, a gleaming tower of steel and glass that loomed over the skyline. As the car pulled up to the entrance, Olivia couldn't help but feel small in comparison to the world Simon inhabited. This was his domain, a place of power and influence that seemed to operate on an entirely different plane from the life she knew. The driver opened the door for her, and Olivia stepped out, her legs trembling slightly as she took in the grandeur of the building. The lobby was vast and immaculate, with marble floors and towering columns that made her feel like she had stepped into a palace. She approached the receptionist, who greeted her with a polite smile and directed her to the elevator. "Mr. Harrington is expecting you," the woman said, her voice calm and professional. Olivia nodded, her nerves fraying as she stepped into the elevator. The ride to the top floor felt like an eternity, the soft hum of the elevator's motor doing little to calm her racing thoughts. When the doors finally slid open, Olivia found herself standing in a sleek, modern office space. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a stunning view of the city skyline, and the room was furnished with minimalist elegance: leather chairs, polished wood, and glass surfaces. At the center of it all, sitting behind a large glass desk, was Simon Harrington. He looked up as she entered, a small smile playing on his lips. "Olivia." "Right on time." She walked toward him, trying to keep her nerves in check. Simon stood and gestured to one of the chairs in front of his desk. "Please, have a seat." Olivia sat down, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Simon's office was immaculate, almost sterile, with nothing out of place. The only personal touch was a small framed photograph on his desk, but Olivia couldn't make out the image from where she was sitting. "I'm glad you decided to take my offer," Simon said, sitting down across from her. "I think this is going to be the start of something great for both of us." Olivia forced herself to meet his gaze. "I want to know exactly what you expect from me." Simon raised an eyebrow, his smile never wavering. "I already told you. I want you to play. I want you to perform, to make a name for yourself. And in return, I'll provide the resources you need to do that." Olivia's heart raced. "And what do you get out of it?" Simon's smile widened. "I get to be associated with your success. I get to help you achieve something extraordinary. And of course, there's the business side of things. If you become as successful as I believe you will, there will be plenty of opportunities for us to work together in the future." Olivia's mind raced. He was talking about business now, about partnerships and opportunities. It wasn't just about music. It was about money, power, and influence. She had suspected there would be more to this arrangement than Simon had initially let on, but hearing it spelled out so plainly made her stomach churn. "So I'm just a part of your empire, then?" Olivia asked, her voice hardening. Simon chuckled softly. "Empire. That's a dramatic way of putting it. But let's be honest, Olivia. Everything is business. The sooner you understand that, the better." Olivia's fingers dug into the fabric of her skirt. She had expected this, hadn't she? She had known from the beginning that Simon wasn't helping her out of the kindness of his heart. But hearing it laid out like this, so cold and calculating, made her feel as though she were a piece on a chessboard, a pawn in Simon's larger game. "And if I decide I don't want to be part of your business?" she asked, her voice tight. Simon's smile faltered for the first time. His eyes darkened, and the easygoing facade slipped ever so slightly. "You've already accepted the money, Olivia. You're in this now. We're partners." The word sent a chill down her spine. Partners. It sounded so innocuous, so harmless. But Olivia knew better. Simon Harrington didn't have partners. He had assets, people he controlled and manipulated for his own gain. "I won't be controlled," Olivia said, her voice low but firm. Simon leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "I don't control people, Olivia. I give them opportunities. What they do with those opportunities is up to them." Olivia stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had stepped into his world, and now she was beginning to see just how dangerous that world could be. But she couldn't back out now. She had made her choice. "I'll play," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for myself." Simon's smile returned, cold and calculated. "Of course. That's exactly what I want." Olivia stood, her legs shaky, but her resolve firm. She had made her decision, and now she had to live with it. But as she walked out of Simon's office, her mind raced with doubts. She had entered into a deal with the devil, and though she had told herself she could handle it, part of her wondered if she had just sold her soul. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Olivia clutched the check in her hand, the weight of it heavier than ever. The price of her ambition was higher than she had ever imagined, and now there was no going back. The crescendo. The next few weeks unfolded in a whirlwind that left Olivia both exhilarated and exhausted. She had accepted Simon Harrington's offer, and in doing so, had entered a world that was as intoxicating as it was suffocating. Simon had wasted no time in making good on his promise. He set her up with a top-tier agent, booked her for performances in some of the city's most exclusive venues, and ensured that her name began to circulate among the wealthy patrons who frequented the Silver Crest. For the first time in years, Olivia found herself standing on stage again, the warm glow of the spotlight on her face, the familiar weight of the violin resting in her hands. The music flowed from her like it had never left, each note a part of her soul that she had buried long ago. The crowds were enchanted, their applause thunderous, and for brief moments, Olivia felt like the girl she had once been. The girl with dreams of playing on the world's greatest stages. But it wasn't long before reality began to creep back in. After every performance, Simon was there, hovering in the background like a shadow. At first, he was charming and supportive, congratulating her on each success, telling her how proud he was of her progress. But slowly, his influence began to seep into every aspect of her life. He wasn't just her benefactor. He was becoming something more, something far more dangerous. "Olivia," Simon said one evening, after one of her performances had drawn a standing ovation. They were seated in a private booth at an upscale lounge, surrounded by the city's elite. Simon had insisted on hosting a post-performance celebration, but Olivia had already grown weary of these events. They were filled with empty faces, hollow praise, and eyes that only saw her as Simon Harrington's new project. "You've made incredible progress," Simon continued, his voice smooth as silk. "But we need to start thinking bigger." Olivia sipped her drink, her exhaustion weighing on her. She had played 4 performances in 5 days, each one more grueling than the last. She loved the music, but the relentless pace Simon had set for her was wearing her down. "Bigger?" she asked, her voice tinged with fatigue. Simon nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Yes. You're ready for the next level. International tours, collaborations with renowned artists, sponsorships. There's no limit to what we can achieve together." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. International tours, collaborations. On the surface, it sounded like everything she had ever dreamed of. But something about the way Simon said we sent a chill down her spine. He spoke as though her success were his as well, as though every note she played somehow belonged to him. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," Olivia said cautiously. "I've only just started performing again. Maybe we should take it slow." Simon's smile tightened, and for a moment, his mask of charm slipped, revealing a glimpse of the man underneath, the man who had built his empire on ruthlessness and manipulation. "You're more than ready," he said, his tone firm. "This is the path you're on now, Olivia. There's no turning back." Olivia felt a knot form in her stomach. She had known from the beginning that Simon's help would come with strings, but now those strings felt like chains, tightening around her with every passing day. As the weeks went on, Simon's control became more suffocating. He dictated her schedule, arranged meetings with people she didn't trust, and began to push her into deals she wasn't comfortable with. Endorsements, photo shoots, interviews, things that had nothing to do with her music, but everything to do with building the brand Simon wanted her to become. "You're not just a musician," Simon said one afternoon during a meeting in his office. "You're a public figure now. People will look to you for more than just your talent. They'll want to know who you are, what you stand for. We need to craft your image carefully." Olivia bristled at his words. Craft her image. She wasn't some product to be molded and sold. She was a musician, an artist. But every time she tried to push back, Simon would remind her of the money, of the opportunities he had given her, of how much he had invested in her career. "You wouldn't be here without me," he said one evening after a particularly tense discussion about a sponsorship deal she didn't want to sign. "Don't forget that." The words stung. Olivia had always known that Simon wasn't helping her out of the goodness of his heart, but hearing him say it so bluntly made her feel like a puppet, her strings pulled by a man who saw her as little more than an investment. The worst part was, she knew he was right. Without Simon's money and connections, she would still be working double shifts at the Silver Crest, struggling to make ends meet. But at what cost? As the pressure mounted, Olivia began to feel herself slipping away. The joy she had once found in playing the violin was being overshadowed by the relentless demands of Simon's world. The music that had once been her refuge now felt like a burden, each performance a reminder that she was no longer in control of her own life. One night, after yet another grueling performance, Olivia found herself alone in her apartment, staring at the violin case sitting in the corner of the room. It had been her dream for so long, but now, every time she looked at it, she felt a sense of dread. She couldn't go on like this. The thought had been creeping into her mind for days, but now it was fully formed. She couldn't keep living under Simon's thumb, couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. She had sacrificed too much already. Her freedom, her integrity, her happiness. But breaking free from Simon wouldn't be easy. He was a man who didn't take kindly to people who crossed him. Olivia knew that if she walked away, there would be consequences. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that if she didn't leave now, she would lose herself completely. The next morning, Olivia made a decision. She would confront Simon. Tell him that she was done, that she couldn't continue living like this. She wasn't sure what would happen, but she knew that she had to try. She had to take back control of her life, no matter the cost. When she arrived at Simon's office later that day, she was met with the usual polished smiles and professional greetings from his staff. But Olivia felt none of the comfort or security she had once felt in this building. Now it felt like a gilded cage, one that Simon had built to trap her. Simon was seated at his desk when she entered, his attention focused on a stack of papers in front of him. He glanced up as she walked in, a smile already forming on his lips. "Olivia," he said, standing to greet her. "I wasn't expecting you." "I need to talk to you," Olivia said, her voice firmer than she expected. She had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in her head, but now that she was here, standing in front of him, the weight of what she was about to do settled heavily on her shoulders. Simon's smile faded slightly, and he gestured for her to sit. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Olivia didn't sit. She couldn't. If she sat, she feared she might lose her nerve. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice steady. "I'm done." Simon's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, there was silence between them. He didn't speak, didn't move. The air in the room grew heavy with tension. "Done," he repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "What do you mean, you're done?" "I mean I'm done with this," Olivia said, her words rushing out now. "I can't keep living like this, Simon. I can't keep letting you control every part of my life. This isn't what I wanted." Simon's expression darkened, and he stood slowly, his movements deliberate. "You wanted success, Olivia. And that's exactly what I've given you. Without me, you wouldn't have anything. I'd rather have nothing than live like this." Olivia shot back, her heart pounding in her chest. "You've taken everything from me. My freedom, my choices, my music. I can't even play without feeling like I'm doing it for you." Simon's eyes flashed with anger, but he remained composed, his voice low and cold. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," Olivia said, her voice trembling slightly. "But it's my mistake to make." There was a long silence between them, the weight of the confrontation hanging in the air. Simon's face was a mask of controlled fury, and Olivia knew she was walking a dangerous line. But she had to stand her ground. Finally, Simon spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think you can just walk away? After everything I've done for you?" "I don't owe you anything," Olivia said, her voice steady. "Not anymore." Simon's expression hardened, and for a moment, Olivia thought he might lash out. But instead, he smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "Very well," he said, his voice icy. "But remember this, Olivia. People don't walk away from me without consequences." Olivia held his gaze, refusing to back down. "I'm willing to face whatever consequences come." With that, she turned and walked out of Simon's office, her heart racing, her hands trembling. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know what Simon would do to try and retaliate. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Olivia felt free. As she stepped out into the crisp evening air, the city bustling around her, Olivia took a deep breath. She didn't have a plan, didn't know where she would go from here. But she had her violin, and she had her music, and that, she realized, was enough.